everybody. Well, thank you so much for having us. It's great to be here to represent the Digital Chamber and to be involved with the Maryland Blockchain Association. I think today we're going to talk a little bit about the Digital Chamber, what it is we do, what kind of legislation we're seeing right now, what we'd like to see in the near future, and also open to any questions towards the end if there's something we don't cover that you'd like us to.
Yeah, thank you guys all for your time today. I think it'll be very interesting. There's a lot moving in DC right now. The Digital Chamber, for those that aren't aware, we're the largest trade association for the blockchain and digital asset industry. So our membership comprises over 250 companies innovating across Web3, financial services, AI, digital identity. So we're really kind of slowly becoming that voice for emerging technology. We really have focused this year on the Clarity Act, which I think we're going to talk a lot about today. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we're right here at the 1-year anniversary of the Genius Act, which established a federal framework for payment stablecoins. And we've seen an enormous explosion of growth for stablecoins, primarily due to Genius. Institutions feeling like they have the room, the clarity, no pun intended, they need to engage in this space and also to, really build long-lasting stablecoin and, digital custody products. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a great conversation today.
Yeah, Abe, you want to give a quick intro? What you've been working on, your role at the Chamber?
Yeah. So I'm a policy associate. I lead our digital asset and banking working group. Over the past few years, the Digital Chamber has added several banks to our membership, primarily due to this looming regulatory clarity. Banks are feeling comfortable to engage at this point. They're actively evaluating opportunities, whether it be tokenized deposits, stable coins, offering custody services. So it's really an exciting time to be in the space. I think we're just seeing an evolution of what digital assets can be, obviously on the peer-to-peer transfer side, but also as financial institutions are increasingly engaging. JP, you want to talk about kind of your policy portfolio?
Yeah, sure. So JP Baudet, I've been with the Digital Chamber about 2 years, and I've covered a number of our working group policy areas. So I started on our national security and illicit finance work, handling Bank Secrecy Act and anti-money laundering policy. I then moved to our decentralization working group, kind of focusing on some of that DeFi work, but also non-financial applications of blockchain technology. And now I took a quick pit stop in tax policy, but please nobody ask me any questions about tax law. It's really complicated. But now I lead our AI and quantum computing group. So I'm in that emerging tech space. Blockchain is still emerging in some sense, but it has been around for 10 years. We're still waiting for a crypto-analytically significant quantum computer to hit markets. So we're trying to get out ahead of that, especially with all the risk that it poses for the industry. So happy to talk about that as well.
Yeah, so here's a little bit of a snapshot of what the Digital Chamber is. We're the largest trade association, so that encompasses really basically everything within this ecosystem, whether it's mining firms, banks, crypto exchanges, service providers, law firms focusing on financial policy, financial law. A lot of what JP and I do day to day is really working with our companies to find industry-wide positions that we can advocate for. And a lot of the work ultimately is education, whether it's on Capitol Hill, with other policymakers, stakeholders. There's so much to this space, and I think it's constantly evolving to the extent that people kind of are constantly learning. So I think a lot of what our work ultimately is tracking the space and just evaluating how we can best advocate for this industry to grow here in the United States. And I think that's really the promise of clarity. When people talk about getting regulatory clarity, it's being able to give builders, give big companies, give everyone the room, the clear rules they need to innovate, to feel comfortable investing capital here, to feel comfortable building here, to not have to set up a foundation offshore and, try to eventually get to the US market, but to start here, build their product from day one here.
I also think that there's something to be said for different types of lobbying shops and policy shops. I interned a little bit at other lobbying firms, multi-client firms, and when I came to the Digital Chamber, and that was the first time I was in a trade association, I was a little worried. I was like, are we, going to be a mouthpiece for the industry? And one thing that I really, really appreciated about not just TDC, but also, our competitors, our colleagues in the space, CCI, BA, DeFi Ed Fund, all of these groups are really critically thinking hard about these questions, and they're able to have those conversations, that give and take with policymakers. So it is like very much an educational process when we go into an office and we're asked questions. Sometimes it's basic, sometimes it's, how does a blockchain work? Why can't we, apply BSA this way? We have to apply our AML restrictions this other way. And sometimes that's just us explaining. But oftentimes it's an active dialogue, and that's something I really love about this space, is that we're all still trying to work through some of the foundational questions. We were asked, flipping back to the signing of Genius, we were on the Hill and we were asked how tariffs and stablecoins interact. And at the time, we genuinely did not have an answer. But we went back and we thought a little bit more about it, and we then were able to have conversations where we thought, oh, like part of this dollar dominance is not just treasuries being held in banks and helping support the American national debt. Part of this dollar dominance piece is that foreign nationals are using stable coins because they have access to them as a way to fight their own country's defenses against tariffs. So we were doing our own little internal studies. That's still in process. We actually have a great project in place right now with GMU's Future of Finance Lab on that. But we're already seeing, I think, out of the Cleveland Fed, a couple weeks ago, they had just published a paper showing that they did the empirics on it. And so you look at Vietnam, you look at Turkey, you look at Mexico, you see stablecoin usage jump as effective tariff rates jump. And that is a reflection of that is really US dollar dominance kind of moving into a new 21st century lens. This isn't like 1980 where we're looking just at like dollar denominated trade. Now we've got this thing where we can watch in real time citizens kind of jump ship on their own national currencies because that's how much faith they have in the US dollar in terms of our activity around the country. So that was a lot to say, but it's just that I love the give and take that policymakers, their staff have been able to prod us with questions, keep us thinking, and also provide us with answers sometimes when we don't necessarily have them. So I don't know if you've seen any of that.
Well, I agree. I think sometimes in these meetings, it takes several meetings and you can kind of gauge how involved they are and how, aware of the industry they are. Sometimes it's pretty basic questions. Sometimes you get very in the weeds on clarity or just kind of what the industry is innovating, working on. And I think it really is kind of an industry-wide effort to educate Capitol Hill and educate lawmakers, whether it's in DC or in states. So we've had engagements obviously with the Maryland Blockchain Association here in Annapolis and some other states as well, to just really talk and socialize about what the industry is doing. And I think that was the beauty of Genius. We saw a similar effort in the 118th Congress, unfortunately did not pass, but it was through those rounds of education, through talking about what stablecoins can do, through understanding that if we integrate dollar stablecoins in the global finance stack, now you're really exposing a huge swath of underbanked, underserved populations to dollars and to stable financial services that they might not have had access to. And I think that's huge. And the design of Genius was very intentional to ensure that the U.S. Treasury's backing stablecoins would then kind of relieve the borrowing costs and borrowing pressures on the U.S. So I think we achieved something very special with Genius, not only for the industry, but for the way that we're cementing dollar dominance in that global financial stack and in that blockchain stack. So I see clarity being a similar kind of effect. not only providing the industry with a lot of benefit in terms of clear rules and ensuring that, we're thinking thoughtfully about this, but also ensuring that the United States plays a big role in what's to come. And I think there is a lot to come in terms of AI agents, quantum computing. We're really only at the beginning. We're a decade in. I think it's interesting. I'm in my 20s. I feel like I've grown up with this stuff, and it's kind of just always been a part of my life. But it's not where we are now, it's where we're going. And I think that's what's exciting a lot of people in DC as well, of creating these clear rules, ensuring that, this can all happen here, that our rivals, geopolitical rivals, kind of illicit finance actors aren't the ones dominating the space, that US companies, lawful actors are the ones really building and innovating.
I agree. And I also think there's the tightrope. If you guys have been following the Clarity discussions, one of the big hot button issues has been the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act. This is the developer protection provision, I think, 603, 4, something like that. And I think this is one of those really, really consequential pieces that will define not just digital assets, but we're looking at vibe coding, we're looking at AI, we're looking at the liability for the products that you're producing and how that gets meted out. If we don't protect developers, I really worry that we're moving into a future where development is supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be near free. Yeah. With AI, we can all access it to an extent, and we might all kind of be signing ourselves up for a personal Wells notice from the SEC if we misstep. And so I think it's super important, and I'm super appreciative of all of the work that the Senate has done to retain that. And it's also really interesting that some of the law enforcement we've seen around the country have kind of had these conversations, to your point, of education, meeting them where they're at, trying to figure out what it is, what are the known unknowns, what are the unknown unknowns, and what can we help shine light on. They're kind of coming around now. I think a couple turned from negative to maybe not positive, but neutral. Was that the switch? So I'm heartened. I'm heartened by that. It's nice to have two big landmark pieces of legislation so close together. I'm also kind of new in my policy career, so it's great to be able to walk in with potentially a couple wins.
Yeah, I think the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act is a huge part of this. Code is free speech. We don't want to create an environment where we're chilling speech, where we're chilling the ability for people to publish and write code freely, to innovate, to really create that ecosystem of competition. And I think that's a big part of this, is ensuring that we have right-sized rules where, a simple software developer who's sitting at home trying to create a cool new product isn't, treated unfavorably because of unclear rules. There's instances of this we've seen in the last few years of software development sort of being chilled through unfair application of money transmission laws and just a lack of clarity, as I'll keep saying. And I think that's what's really important about this bill. There's so much in this bill that will not only help the industry, but also just help the United States. I think around illicit finance as well, we've seen there's so many tools in this bill. It's almost a toolkit for law enforcement to help, deter crime, deter fraud, deter scamming in this ecosystem through expanded appropriations, expanded information sharing agreements between businesses and law enforcement, but also just better understanding of what digital assets are, how crypto moves, how blockchains work, and also the traceability, which I think is a big part of our education. People don't understand how transparent and visible public blockchains are in the transactions. So, that's something we obviously hear a lot, and that's a big part of our education effort, is really showing this is a huge opportunity for law enforcement to get in there and catch bad actors, and really for them to have a better understanding of where everything is heading in this digital finance age.
And I think it's also really funny. We forgot to mention that there is that really, really strong protection in the BRCA. It's kind of like, we know what criminals look like. If you're bragging about being a criminal, so tough having to read through some of those complaints. Russian oligarchs were open for business, come use our chain. Yeah, yike. But I think we've taken the proactive steps to, like you said, if you're just a developer sitting at home trying to create a cool new product, you shouldn't be facing federal prosecution. If you are building a product to specifically circumnavigate federal law, yeah, I think there's some language in Clarity that you should probably be investigated, that should be shut down. And I think that that's a really smart way that politicians have been able to move through it.
Yeah, and I think kind of aside from market structure, a lot of our work is kind of looking at those emerging use cases. As JP was mentioning earlier, I think a lot of our work ultimately is educating lawmakers on non-financial use cases. I think a lot of times in this industry, people see the financial use cases and that comes to the top of their mind when they think about digital assets, about what blockchain technology can do. And a lot of our work is ultimately talking about how distributed ledgers and blockchain in general is an information sharing technology that has a financial application, of course, but there's a huge non-financial application. So something I love to reference is that I believe in Oklahoma, there's a huge cattle farm that tags animals using digital identity livestock credentials. And this helps with ghost cattle and instances of unfair sales where you're saying you have 1,000 pieces of cattle, you only have 500. Using livestock and animal tracking, you can actually really have each of these animals tied to a credential and ensure that what you're buying is what you're getting. So that's a really unique, interesting use case. I feel like people don't talk about.
That's cattle proof?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like cattle proof a lot as a business model. There's also some really cool stuff we've seen in terms of tracking aircraft. We saw a Solana-based project that launched last summer that instead of using air traffic towers pings to transponders, which are on a delay, they happen every couple of seconds, and that's the data that we're seeing on like public flight trackers. It's got this delay. Unfortunately and tragically, in certain circumstances, that delay can mean that you cannot effectively see threats if they're moving closely enough together at high enough speeds. And so this blockchain-based system, it uses its crypto rewards, its token rewards, to incentivize setting up these towers. And you set up a little tower on your balcony, on your roof, out in your front yard, and it sends a constant crowdsourced signal that provides real time. It kind of operates in this mesh coverage network. It operates real time, hits transponders from planes, increases the information and the speed with which the information is coming back to people being able to read that, including the pilots themselves. And we get coverage all over the US where we don't have air traffic towers just sitting because there aren't airports. Half the country is, I'm an East Coast boy. When I go west of the Mississippi, it is a very different country out there. And so if we can get ranchers, farmers, people just living in their smaller communities to set these things out in their yard, they're pulling $10 a week, $20 a week, $100 a week, depending on air traffic over their home. But they might be providing like life-saving information. Plane goes down, you could cover a lot of land in the latency that's making it back to a tower. So I think there's all these applications that we don't really think of, and how the financialization is kind of built into some of these platforms. It can be a tough sell, but it's not to scam. It's not to deprive people of their money. Those frauds and scams exist. We have to go after them. But so much of the industry is trying to solve real problems and providing novel ways to incentivize people to do that. That's one of the things I love about the companies in the space. And one of the things I also think policymakers have been pretty open to. I don't know, what's the kind of response that you've seen in terms of talking to policymakers about this stuff?
I mean, I think it's the two camps that you're kind of highlighting. It's the folks that unfortunately only view this industry through the vector of illicit finance, of state-controlled actors engaging. And then I think there's kind of that second camp that has now begun to realize that this is an information-sharing technology, that there's a lot of potential to blockchain beyond how it's currently being deployed. And so I think that's really a core part of our work, is getting them to see that potential, is getting them to see what builders are doing every day and how they're kind of innovating and pushing the boundaries of what we can do. Another great example I always like to talk about, going back to kind of the financial use cases, is Stellar, and also what the UN is doing around benefits disbursement. I think that's huge. The ability to be able to instantaneously deploy funds to people, whether it's in Ukraine. I think there was also an instance we saw in Africa of basically a region that goes through periodic droughts. What they were able to do is, using satellite imagery, they were able to track when these drought conditions were beginning and deploy and disperse those funds instantaneously. When through traditional money transmission and wires and all this sort of like traditional money sending infrastructure, it takes up to a week to get to those folks. A week might be too late sometimes. Now you can distribute those funds instantaneously before the drought even really begins. So that's huge. The potential of what that could do for people is huge.
I love that you brought that up. I love using a personal anecdote. Has to feel like the right place and time, but I think the statute of limitations has expired on this. I haven't checked that. But I used to work in Haiti doing international development work. We ran medical missions down there. We provided educational grants and provided business education to women-led enterprises so that people in an area that were making $200 a year could, build some equity and build futures for their children. Not everyone has a bank account. Not everyone has access to a bank. Not everyone has, especially in these situations, Sudan, Ethiopia right now, the Sahel regions, Egypt, there are whole parts of the world where traditional banks just can't serve a lot of their customers. We were not declaring, money we were bringing through customs because all of our in-country recommendations, all of our consultants were saying, if you tell that customs agent that you have $5,000 in your bag, you will walk out of this airport without that $5,000. And so we were taking a risk every single time that we could end up in a lot of trouble. And it was just so that we could get money to people who we couldn't even wire it. Like sometimes the wires took 2 weeks, sometimes Western Union worked. But also, like Western Union, you need your ID. If we didn't have the right ID for the right person, we were sending a runner. That's not what Western Union wants to hear either. Like, this technology just allows so much more clarity, transparency, people to finally play by rules that make sense, and ultimately to solve some of these problems, like you're saying, of we pair this up with AI, and now we've got preemptive aid. Like, that's just so cool. I hope you guys think that's cool. I think that's so cool. So it's cool being able to bring that to lawmakers, and I think I've seen a lot of good response to that too.
Yeah, and I think we've seen a similar reaction with kind of the growth of AI over the last 2 years. I think ultimately crypto, digital assets, they're not partisan. It's an emerging technology issue, and it's the same way with AI. There's folks on the left, there's folks on the right that like it, there's folks on the left, and there's folks on the right that don't like it. I think that's kind of the point we're at with crypto. I think when you also think about AI, it's really interesting to think about what agentic commerce is going to look like in the coming years. I think there's a bunch of potential there. There's been multiple studies that AI agents prefer transacting in stable coins due to their programmability and also just how stable they are and transparent they are. So when you start thinking about what that can do, you have your AI agent set to buy whatever product or whatever service at a certain point. And then to be able to kind of set that on a cycle or to have that agent monitor and, react to trends and patterns, it's really exciting. So I think that's when we're getting back to the financial side. That's what a lot of these institutions are seeing as well. There's
shameless plug for the Maryland Blockchain Association and DARA, who have a agentic finance or agentic commerce working group. I would very much recommend that y'all check that out and contribute where you can. TDC will be happily supporting, but sorry, I wanted to make sure I plugged them.
No, it's a great plug. So up here on the board, we got our working groups. So the way that the Digital Chamber functions is we have obviously many companies involved. These companies typically participate in one or multiple of these working groups. It's a way that TDC is able to advocate across a bunch of different policy verticals, which sometimes can be, extremely different areas of expertise, but also just the committees you're engaging with on Capitol Hill, the policymakers are just of completely different, backgrounds. So this is a way that TDC is able to, really fully advocate for our members. So I just want to quickly run through. We have our accounting working group, our AI and quantum working group, which JP leads, our consumer innovation working group, which is really focused on, NFTs and consumer use cases for digital assets and blockchain. We have our compliance and cybersecurity working group, which is very active right now. Decentralization, as JP was mentioning earlier, working on a lot of DeFi issues. our digital asset and banking working group, which I lead, which really focuses on stable coins, tokenized deposits, a lot of what we're seeing right now around tokenized money market funds. It's exciting. I get nerdy about it. I love talking about it. Our digital power network, which is actually the largest U.S. coalition of Bitcoin miners, representing 80+% of the hash rate here in the U.S. We have our global developments working group. I think so much of what we're doing here in the U.S. is really reflecting across the world, whether it be Japan or the EU opening its second MiCA consultation for their regulatory framework. I think a lot of jurisdictions are thinking about what the U.S. is doing and whether they want to kind of follow that path or forge their own path. We have our prediction markets working group, one of TDC's newest initiatives. We're working with some of the bigger operators in the space, and there's a lot to be done there right now. Our state network, which is how we were lucky enough to start engaging with the Maryland Blockchain Association, realizing that policy isn't just being crafted in DC, but it's happening, 50 state capitals around the U.S. We have our tax task force, really actively shaping a lot of the policy and the conversations here in DC around the Digital Asset Parity Act, which is the effort to create almost a tax regulatory framework for digital assets. There's a lot of sort of nuance to that. Our Token Alliance, which focuses on jurisdictional questions between the SEC and the CFTC, back in the day of are we a security, are we a commodity? Our tokenization working group focusing a lot on real-world asset, RWA tokenization, which is a huge area. And our Treasury Council, very focused on digital asset treasury models. So firms like Strategy and other firms that are building treasuries for publicly traded companies. But JP, I want to turn it over to you, in terms of you've been across so many of the working groups, what your experience, in these working groups have been, maybe if you want to give the audience an idea of how they function.
Yeah. I mean, each working group has a chair or sometimes a team of co-chairs, and then we have a leadership committee for each working group. That LC kind of collaboratively decides on what our strategic initiatives for each group are going to be. We loop in the larger working group for projects. If we're responding to, a request for information or comment, if there's active legislation that we'd like to provide red lines on or commentary and analysis on. Sometimes there will be initiatives that are kind of fully TDC insulated. So one right now that we're in the process of finalizing is like an internal compute marketplace. So we have miners that have data centers. We have AI companies and software developers who need to buy compute. So instead of making these individuals brave the market to fight for pricing on compute, we figured why not act as a coordinating layer. And so some of those initiatives are also kind of streamlined by our members. But a big piece here is that we try to keep everybody up on the latest news. We're always scouring our newsletters and alerts. But we also have access to like a members-only Telegram where we all collaboratively are able to share news, share ideas, ask questions. And then there's like these ad hoc kind of work streams as well. So within AI and quantum right now, just as an example, we're answering a couple of different RFIs. Each response is its own work stream. So some people feel a little bit more sensitive to, there's one on content restrictions, for like free speech restrictions around ideological bias that the FTC is asking for comment on. People might have, especially with our law firm presence, they might be really well situated to provide, a legal interpretation of that, and they may want to focus on that. On the other hand, we may be talking about technical fixes to that exact same problem. How do we solve ideology or ideological bias technically through architectural redefinitions? And so the law firms may not be the best fit for that. And so we run two different work streams, or we run larger work streams and combine them. But it's really, we would be nothing without our members and without how passionate they are for supporting the initiatives. Every now and then, I will say, I bring up an initiative and I think it's the coolest thing in the world. And it's really important that we have educated, talented members who've spent a lot of time in the space who can say, hey, JP, it's cool that you like that, but this isn't gonna be a big question. Let's move on to something more substantive. I think they keep us grounded. They provide us with the support we need, and ultimately, like, they're driving the ship in terms of how our strategy is shaped.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Our members play such a huge role in our policy initiatives. I also think the interesting part about being in this space is there's two unique dimensions to it. It's the technological capabilities of the industry, of what we're building, the realities of the constraints, and also the potential, and then how that intersects with something that at times seems pretty different, which is the legislative and political realities of how DC operates, what the U.S. code says, how our law and rule of law works. So I think there's a lot to be said about balancing those two efforts and kind of ensuring that the policy we're creating is right-sized, is accurate to how the technology functions. I think a lot of our work is ultimately seeing instances where someone might come in, whether it's in DC or a state, and have this great idea for a new bill, for example, and then we get in that legislative text, and then you look at how they're defining some of this stuff, and you're saying, wait, this doesn't really work. This definition doesn't make sense. This isn't accurate to how the industry functions. This isn't correct technologically. So it's really bridging those two areas, and I think that's something really unique. We always kind of are in a position where we can constantly learn from our members, and we're constantly learning from the policymakers we talk to, and I just think that's such a cool moment to be in, whether it's at the federal level or at the state level.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things about Maryland Blockchain Association, and our digital state network has been working hard to try to make these relationships across the country. I know just as one other piece, we were talking AI for a little bit and agentic commerce. If you guys aren't thinking about identity and authorization in association with agentic commerce, you need to. That's going to be the unlock. We can't have agents running around representing themselves as humans, not being humans, making mistakes. That liability will be a nightmare to fight in the courts. And at the state level, as you were saying, we've got some great initiatives. We were just talking about Chris Brummer's SETI initiative, the state-endorsed digital identity that he's running out of the privacy office in Utah. I think he's chief privacy officer for the state, but somebody double check that for me. And he's leading a multi-state coalition around this SETI initiative that TDC has been lucky enough to support. We've seen it grow from 1 to, I think they're at 6 or 7 states now. We'd really like to see this develop as a federal framework, state by state, and so we'll be working with Maryland to try to get that done here as well. But on the, sometimes a question doesn't fall neatly into one of these groups. So like digital identity is a good example. Where originally it sat with decentralization, now it sits with our compliance and cybersecurity. Different people have different skill sets that they can bring here. I heard Hacken was at the conference either yesterday or a couple days ago. And Hacken used to be a member of TDC. They were super helpful in terms of crafting some of these questions around identity and authorization, but actually from the cybersecurity side of those two pieces, not just defining those identity and authorization kind of aspects. So we don't know what we don't know, and it's great to have such a wide range of members that can help us out, and players at the government level who are so willing to work with us and let us know exactly what boxes we need to check and what answers we need to give.
Yeah, there's so much exciting stuff moving throughout the states. I think that's something we're really actively kind of growing our presence in terms of the policy dimension of it. Also just kind of getting out to all these different states. What we found is really it's sometimes just 1 or 2 lawmakers in a state that are really actively passionate about this area, that want to figure out how they can put their state in the best position to succeed. As we're seeing all these companies begin to onshore, as we're seeing builders feel more comfortable to start a startup or build their product here. So some interesting stuff that I'm monitoring is a lot of the strategic Bitcoin, but also broader digital asset reserve legislation. We saw Texas, New Hampshire pass legislation this past cycle. I think it's really interesting when you begin to consider how that can play. I know New Hampshire is doing something with Bitcoin-backed municipal bonds. We recently had an Association of State Treasurers official reach out to us to just do education because they're considering how that might play into bond issuance, digital assets, blockchain technology. So again, as I keep on saying, we're really at the beginning. When you start thinking about digital identity, we saw FinCEN and all the banking regulators put out a BSA modernization proposal, and one of the questions distinctly asks, what is industry building that's innovative to meet your compliance obligations for anti-money laundering, for countering the financing of terrorism? What can the government be aware of that industry is building? You start thinking, oh my God, digital identity, that's a great use case for meeting BSA and compliance obligations. And so I think that's a prime example of how this innovation ultimately can loop back around to doing the same stuff that we've been doing more efficiently, more effectively, more privacy preserving, and just ensuring that the folks in DC and the government are understanding what all is being built. So this is just a longer description of our different working groups. We can probably jump past this.
Just want to make sure we don't leave any meat on the table. You want to run through some of these?
Yeah, maybe we could do a little quick policy update on where we're at with the Clarity Act. As I mentioned earlier, we're at the 1-year anniversary of the Genius Act. So the rules are still being implemented very actively by regulators. We're very close to the implementation effectiveness date. It's January 1st, 2027. Clarity has been a wild ride, I think, in the 119th Congress. The point we're at now is arguably the most critical point over the next few weeks to see if this bill will be passed and ultimately signed into law. I think it's very exciting to see, all the work that we've been doing at TDC for years now, but also just especially the last year, kind of at this inflection point. But JP, if you want to kind of give maybe an update of how things have gone over the last year and the progress.
Yeah, I mean, the Senate bill that we're looking at now is a very different bill than the House version that passed, last year. We have come around on a lot of issues, really met in the middle on, through a lot of back and forth from both sides of the aisle. The illicit finance protections you were mentioning earlier and the coordination that's enabled between government, law enforcement, and industry, that's great to see. As long as the developer protections are in there, I'm happy with how DeFi has turned out. DPIN was sacrificed on the altar of agreement, but that's something we can come back to. I think ultimately we've answered all of the really important questions that are necessary for a market structure bill, and I get really frustrated with some of the. I'm a progressive. I am only a little ashamed to say that I knocked doors for Elizabeth Warren in 2012 in the special election. But working with offices that have been anti-crypto as we've approached this vote on Clarity, it is so important that we keep saying all of the compromises we've made, all of the wins that the state, that consumer protection advocates, that users will get from this bill. We answered all of the really necessary ones. Now it's, can we finally come to an agreement on, the tough, nice to haves. Like, we got to make sure that Democrats and Republicans are both comfortable with whatever ethics provision comes out. And I think we're there. I think that the White House has been, willing to work with them on that. And I think we're going to reach the finish line. And DeFi, I mean, that was an education piece. Did that shock you at all that there was so much pushback on the DeFi?
Well, I think that gets back to the education part of this. I just think a lot of folks don't understand DeFi. They don't understand the industry more broadly. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people try to put our industry in a box of one thing or another. And I think, as in life, everything is nuanced. There's multiple levels and multiple layers to everything. And I think what's so key to Clarity is giving our regulators that clear authority they need. So giving the CFTC clear jurisdiction over spot markets for digital commodities. There's just so much in this bill that will enhance how our government is able to, operate as it relates to digital assets, but also, for businesses to give them that clear balance. So if you're, someone that's just publishing code, if you're deploying a protocol, you know who your regulator is, or whether you need to go to a regulator at all. And if you're an exchange, you know what the responsibilities you carry are. If you're a broker, you know what you need to do. And I think that's so key to this bill, because for so long, folks have, been afraid to engage because they don't know where to go. It used to be come in and register. That's what they were telling everyone, no matter what you were building, and that just doesn't make sense. Not everything is meant to be regulated and treated like a security. I think when you look back to the Howey test, that was something that was designed for a citrus or an orange grove. How can we apply that to crypto? And I think that's so key to what we...
Which is so silly on its face, right? Like, in what way is this crypto like an orange tree? Yeah.
I think that's what's been so important throughout the Senate's deliberation. So as we know, in January, the Agriculture Committee passed their portion, the Digital Commodities Intermediaries Act, and we saw banking about a month ago now, I believe, pass their portion of the Clarity Act, actually bringing Democrats across, so it was not a party line vote. And I think that's really evidence of how hard everyone's been negotiating, and how, these negotiations have been good faith. Everyone wants to get this bill done. There's been so much effort put in by committee staff, by offices, by industry, just to get this product across the finish line. And I think when we start thinking about where we're going, I hope, we're sitting here a year from now, just like how we were, yesterday, hosted our Genius Act anniversary party. I hope next year, a year from today, we're sitting here talking about a year post-Clarity and how all that implementation is going. So that's my hope. But I don't know, JP, what are you thinking?
No, I think that's the dream for us who have been working on it for the last year plus. I think, regardless of what the turnout. Oh yeah.
What's your prognosis? Okay, passing the Senate, real challenge. Let's say it succeeds, and you're both optimistic. Get it done. How's the House reconciliation? Because it's a very different bill. Is there time? The midterms are coming. People's attention is on getting reelected. Let's be realistic. Everybody's there. The whole idea is, we got to be incumbents. We got to win. So, is there really a window there to get through the reconciliation of the bill so that then something comes good? Because then it's going to have to go back, and everybody's going to have to look at the reconciliation bill again. Do we have time before the election, really? I mean, just honest, being real.
I'm biased, but yes. I think we have the votes in the House that we need. When you saw Clarity pass last summer alongside the Genius Act in the House and the Anti-CBDC State Surveillance Act, there was a huge bipartisan coalition. I think they got 60-plus Democrats to vote yes on Clarity. Dusty Johnson, other leaders in the House have indicated that there is still a lot of bipartisan interest in getting this bill done. So I think as we're kind of looking at it, the challenge is not the reconciliation part of it. I think that'll obviously take time, of course, just because the way that the Senate has approached it, as JP was mentioning earlier, is completely different than how the House first approached it. But I think what we're really laser focused on right now is getting to 60 votes in the Senate. For those that aren't aware, that's what you need to invoke cloture and really get this moving. So that's the goal, is getting, that there's been a group of Democrats that have been engaging on, several issues and getting them comfortable with where the text is and, how everything is in the bill to make this a bipartisan package. And that's what it ultimately needs to be.
Yeah, and the House will probably not hold near and dear to any parts of their text that differ. Like, I think the reconciliation process itself will actually be super, super simple, because I think that a lot of people in the House will just say, hey, this is our shot. If we really want this market structure bill, we're just going to write down what the Senate wrote down. For the most part, make sure Ledge Council takes a look at it. But I think that's good in some ways. I think that it's important in other places to make sure that we are meeting everybody where they need to be met. So like tax is a good example of, like, you mentioned the Parity Act, which was, I think that one was the one introduced by Miller and Congressman Miller and Congressman Horsford. So bipartisan tax package, a lot of great stuff in there. The committee has decided to go a different way, and they've worked really hard to get a good bill. But there's some personalities, up and down dais that are holding on to pieces from work that they worked really hard on with their staff, and we're ahead of the curve, and we're doing this tax policy when nobody else was. So I think it's important that we do respect that process and all the hard work that the House put in. But if we gotta get a market structure bill done, I do think there's time, but we're gonna have to work to get it done.
And I think one of the things I've realized, just as being someone who loves this space, has been following this space for so long, more just from the sidelines, out of my nerdy interest, is legislating is really messy. It seems like it should be straightforward. It seems like it should be easy, but it's really not. And so that's kind of the big challenge, is just getting everyone, aligned. As JP's saying, there's always a lot of personalities that come into play, folks that have worked on specific parts of the bill. They don't want to give that part up. And obviously, as you're mentioning, the midterms, huge. We're running up against a shrinking, clock here, and being able to ensure that we can get this done in time. I think we have great regulators right now at the SEC and the CFTC that really understand the technology at a deep level, but also understand how the Commodities Exchange Act, but also our securities laws apply to digital assets, or how they shouldn't apply. So the treatment of a tokenized security would be different than something like Bitcoin viewed as a commodity. But I think the concern is what happens in the future. We can't go back to the prior administration's SEC. That cannot happen again. You can't deploy capital, start building here, and then all of a sudden, you get hit with another come in and register, even if that doesn't make sense for your business. So it's really ensuring that the industry has that future-proof foundation, that we're putting this into law, that we're implementing these rules. We have that notice and comment rulemaking process to ensure that the industry and other stakeholders get their say in how these rules are implemented, and that it's not done through guidance, which I think has been great. Our yearly summit, the DC Blockchain Summit, which I, shameless plug, would love for you all to attend. Chair Atkins announced the token taxonomy framework, which has been what the industry has been wanting for so long. Just a clear, jurisdictional boundary of when I'm building something, who's my regulator, and that's great. But we need to get that in law. You can't have that as guidance that can be overturned at a later point. We need that, clarity. As I think everyone in the industry is tired of hearing the word clarity.
Yeah, Gerard.
So, sort of tagging on the comment you just made. So, clarity's going to pass, is being optimistic, right? And then when it does, then there's a lot of issues for us to tackle as an industry, right? What do you think is the next priority after clarity passes? And is there
Tax. Yes. From our conversations, it seems like the whole Congress is set on getting a tax package as soon as possible, and it's actually not contingent on clarity. They've been pretty open that they're going to bring that up for a vote, whether clarity passes or not. I did mention that there's some, some trading going on back there. Some conversations still need to be had, but the Senate has recently picked up the tax torch, and they've started drafting as well. They're going to follow Ways and Means lead, which is kind of an interesting development. Seeing how clarity worked, where the Senate kind of came in and they restructured clarity. It's interesting to see Senate Finance kind of deferring to Ways and Means, but Ways and Means has been working on the bill for quite a bit. So yeah, I would expect a tax package. Probably won't cover everything. And then there are some niche edge cases that I'd love to talk about because they're nerdy, but won't ever affect anyone in this room. So so we got mining, staking, and so validation taxation, which they're trying to come to a tech-neutral approach that is applicable to both mining and to staking platforms, as well as potentially novel platforms, proof of history, that sort of thing. But the staking piece is particularly tricky because they have a lot of proposals on timing for taxation and for character, but they don't have anything out on sourcing. So if you've got a validator abroad and you are a U.S. national and you are delegating your staking to that validator abroad, are you taxed? Is it taxed as foreign income because it's a service provided by a foreign provider? Really important for large portfolios and these ETFs like ETH ETFs or Solana ETFs that are themselves staked. That's a huge portion of the network, or will be, and so we need to have that clarified. But that's a big one. Timing is the part that everyone wants to fight over, but I do think sourcing is like the tough question. Everyone wants to know, can I stick my Bitcoin in a retirement account and not touch it, and leave it to my kids and come out tax-free? Sounds really nice. I get the government's pushback on, hey, we want something for that Bitcoin too. But that one's big. I think stable coins are going to get clear rules around their dollar equivalency for tax purposes. So for those who aren't aware, all crypto for tax purposes is treated as property. So these really esoteric barter rules apply for your tax burden. So Ways and Means has really tackled the stablecoin piece. They're digital dollars, treat them like digital dollars, tax them like a dollar. If it's worth 99 cents, and 4 1,000ths of a penny, just treat it like a dollar for tax purposes so that we're not tracking all this stuff. De minimis is tricky. This is something I've heard a lot of people talk about in terms of establishing a broad de minimis to ease the tax administration burden. And one thing that the TDC tax group, and I really wish this was not so, but we've been so focused on trying to get this message out that a broad de minimis unfortunately will not reduce your administrative burden, because you are going to have to track each and every transaction to prove that you are not trying to game the system, right? If there's a $300 de minimis, you could just send your $400 thing and pay your taxes on it, or you could try to game it by sending it two $200 things, both under the de minimis, to prove to the government that you are not gaming the system. You still have to track all that stuff. De minimis, broad de minimis was not addressed, but transaction fees, especially on stable coins, that is something that they're looking at right now, which adds up. And for administrability purposes is nice to not have to track sub-cent transactions. So that's what I think. I know I'm missing some other stuff. There's like mark-to-market, wash sale rule is something that the government really wants to see finally put in place. But then, of course, allowances around the wash sale rule, because if you're trading an L2 token on Ethereum, you may be paying gas fees in Ethereum. If you then buy Ethereum later, that clearly has nothing to do with trying to, that's not your wash sale. So there's some nuance around that, but I do think they're going to solve some everyday questions for crypto users and our tax burden. Some common sense stuff. They're going to reach parity on a lot. I do have confidence that they're going to come together and get good staking and mining rules, and we're going to have to go back to the drawing board later for some of the niche stuff.
And something I think in relation to tax, I've heard, I'm not super active on the tax front. Yeah, I'm no tax policy expert, but is that the tax framework is the other half of the puzzle. You can't have clarity, you can't have genius, and not have clear tax rules. So this is really a kind of an evolving effort to just, create parity where it makes sense, and also recognize where there's technological differences where, we obviously need to approach from a technology neutral stance and just figure out what makes sense, what's rational to do. And so I think that's the big focus around staking and mining, de minimis, is making sure that these products have clear tax rules to make them viable, on par with traditional fiat assets.
Yeah, which also touches the debanking piece. We beat debanking over the last year and a half, but it's all relying on guidance. So without clarity, without the clear rules of the road that companies at least know what to do and are making a good faith effort. I think the blockchain maturity model is an excellent example of like an industry-led initiative that companies can proactively take, which is hosted by the Government Blockchain Association, where Gerard's from. There's great industry initiatives, but an administration can decide it doesn't care in the future if we don't get legislation in place. And I think taxation is another one of those things that now we're not talking about going after developers. Now we're talking about going after users. Because if users don't understand their tax burden, the tax man does not have much sympathy for, oops, I didn't know I owed you that, So I think that's really important also.
And on that front, it's so silly, some of the stuff you see of, someone does one transaction on an exchange and then all of a sudden they get mailed were emailed 100 forms that they need to fill out, and just like a mountain of paperwork. So I think that's a big deal, is just making sure that our rules of the road are clear and like right-sized for what the industry's building. I think the debanking piece you touched on is huge as well. In the prior administration, what we saw with Operation Choke Point 2.0, it was really harmful for the industry. You know, regulators pushing businesses and banks to really end relationships with lawful digital asset businesses. You know, kind of a concerted effort here to isolate the industry and weaken its ability to really grow. And I think that's such a big part of clarity, is just creating that stability. Like I need to keep on repeating it, because that's just so core to what we're doing here, is creating that stability for growth. You know, frequently when we're talking to our banking members, you know, and these are some of the largest banks, whether they're GSIBs, like globally important banks, or also just some smaller, mid-sized banks here in the United States, they're not going to engage unless they have that clear rule of the road, those clear rules of the road laid out, implemented, you know, ready to go. They're not going to start deploying capital and really start deploying a lot of resources towards building in something that's unstable foundation. So we need clarity. And I think the next few weeks, as we approach the August midterms, are going to be very important to that. I think from our conversations we've heard in DC, past August, this becomes very difficult, near impossible package to move, just given the midterm dynamics. My girlfriend works in campaign fundraising, so she's the one tracking all the races. But we have a rare moment here to just see everyone's work pay off, from the industry side, from the staffer side, just all the other associations that have been working so hard on this with their members. We're at an important moment. And so you were asking about odds of passage a little bit earlier. 50-50. It either happens or it doesn't, is my answer.
I'm not sponsored, but I have $10 on a Kalshi market that it'll pass. I put that in January, so take that for what it's worth. $10 is big money, I know.
Quick question. So one of the areas that I think is important, and I don't know if anybody's talking about it, I don't know if you guys are, and I hope you guys can, and by the way, the Digital Chamber is the leader in policy, so we're big fans.
We didn't pay him to say that.
But I'm going to the Kalshi market now. So my question is really about identity, right, privacy, and the government's right to know, as it relates to tax. So when I file my tax forms, the IRS says, do you have any crypto, right? Because if there's any transactions, right, then, you know, I've got to pay tax on them. But if I haven't moved any crypto, if I just have it, right, does the government have a right to know whether or not I own it? Because to me, that seems to be somewhat of a privacy issue. Now, clearly, if I owe taxes, I need to disclose it, right? And then that kind of moves back over to wallets, and then the requirement potentially for identity to be connected to wallets. So can we do anonymous transactions? Are any of those conversations happening on the Hill? Should they? What are your thoughts about the government's right to know what I'm doing with my money?
I'll let you jump in on the tax piece. I just want to add, we're seeing that at the state level play out. I would encourage everyone to go track the New York. There's a dormant Bitcoin case where an anonymous plaintiff is basically claiming ownership over, I think it's 300,000 wallets where there hasn't been activity, I think in 3 to 5 years. So I think the periods of dormancy that we're seeing are super interesting as it relates to unclaimed property, and also a lot of states don't have clear frameworks relating to crypto and wallets for unclaimed property. But that sets a really dangerous precedent where, you know, as you're saying, if you just have something in cold storage, you're not moving it for a few years just for investment purposes, all of a sudden an anonymous plaintiff can come in and say, oh, actually, that's my crypto. He hasn't touched it. That doesn't make any sense. We filed an amicus in that case with 2 of our members, Cahill, Brown Rudnick, just pushing back on that theory, because that completely erodes self-custody. It also completely erodes like the investment, you know, kind of property rights that are integral to this industry. But JP, I'll let you jump in on the tax side.
It begs the question, who has the right to make the decision? Does the government have the right to go and essentially take that crypto, if it's on a public blockchain, right? Or could Canada do it, or Russia, right? Does the United States have the right to take
I would like to preface this by saying I am not an attorney and this is not legal advice, nor is it financial advice. And real quick before I answer, hey, Jackie.
We have 7 minutes.
Okay, cool, thank you. That's what I wanted to check on. I think that one of the beautiful things of blockchain, and this is my personal philosophical perspective, there are plenty of people from, left-wing cypherpunks, you got your right-wing libertarian cypherpunks, you got your state actors. We're here working with the Maryland Blockchain Association. You're from the Government Blockchain Association, so of course, yeah, right. Scariest words in the English language. So we've all got these different ideological priors, and I think that this is one of the real tough sticking points with talking to certain policymakers and certain policy perspectives on the DeFi identification piece, where certain senators were really insistent on KYCing, instituting BSA and anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism checks on participants in the DeFi ecosystem. But as you mentioned, with Canada or Italy or Russia or China, the blockchain is open to all of these states because the blockchain is not beholden to any of these states. It is, in its purest sense, a dual system that operates, outside of, but in a mirrored capacity to a lot of state-led activity. I think there is reasonable minds can disagree. Libertarian would definitely disagree with me saying this. I think there's a really strong case that the government should be able to know where you have every issued US dollar at any given time, because it is the government's money. It's debt, right? That you're holding, that's theirs. They should be able to know where it all is. That's my take. I don't think the same is true of Bitcoin. I don't think the same is true of even utility tokens that are used to access things. And I think we can see, I don't want to use China as the boogeyman, because I don't even think that that's necessarily fair to a lot of the decisions they've made in terms of their tech policy. But we've definitely seen smart city concepts be proposed where if you have a lot of Helium token, for instance, Helium's one of our DPIN members, they run crowdsourced like ground up internet coverage. If you have a lot of Helium tokens to access the Helium network, in the right setting where that's public information, that gives somebody insight into, oh, you're a Helium user. We can potentially limit, we can find out which pseudonymous identity you are through that. And that all kind of pairs down with how do we handle data privacy. And in terms of initiatives at the state level, and none of this is on tax, and apologies, Gerard, but at the state level with some of the privacy questions, we've kind of had to come to terms with this exact piece of how do data brokers get regulated. We've got state legislation in 21-ish states, but now we've got the GUARD Financial Data Privacy Act out of HFSC, and we've got the Secure Data Privacy Act out of Energy and Commerce committees in the House, both of which are aiming to provide national, like federal privacy language. I think both are great initiatives, but they have to be right-sized. I mean, where does blockchain fit in? GDPR says blockchain, your right to be deleted can't be respected. Don't use a blockchain. I think that's untenable. I mean, I guess for what that's worth, I work at the Blockchain Trade Association. But I do think that, like, if we want to see innovation and the next generation of this tech, I think we are going to have to make some compromises. We're going to have to look at technical fixes, legal fixes. So I would venture that, or I would recommend that we all pay attention to privacy legislation at the state and federal level, and we'll make sure to loop Maryland Blockchain Association in with that for anyone who wants to participate that way.
Yeah, and I think we're at this interesting inflection point, obviously with Clarity, but on a maybe philosophical, on a policy level, of kind of, I see two camps emerging, like the KYC everything. If you're engaging in crypto, if you're engaging in digital assets, like you need to be KYC'd. That's clearly one path that we've seen a lot of folks advocate for. I don't think that's really necessarily our position. I think there's instances where it makes sense when you're going through an intermediary that you need to KYC for compliance reasons. But if you're engaging in DeFi, if you're self-custodying assets, might not necessarily make sense to have you KYC in all instances. And then I think we get to the interesting point of if you're holding assets in cold storage and then you're just holding it long term for investment, and now it can be classified as dormant. How does that really intersect with all of this? So I just think there's a lot of really nuanced, thorny policy questions we need to answer, and I think that's why industry engagement at this point is so important, because if we have rules that are uninformed, all we're going to do is push industry to jurisdictions with lighter touch rules where our regulators don't have the same visibility. So to folks that are always kind of worried about illicit finance in this space, my response is always to highlight clarity is the best medicine to deter illicit finance, to make sure this activity happens here where we can monitor it. And I know we're running short on time, so I just want to turn it back to the audience. If you guys have any questions, if we can talk about more about what TDC does or anything on that front.
With our last couple minutes, does anyone want to hear us talk about anything specific? Like a Roomba, you can point us in the direction you want us to go, and we will go.
Okay. So we launched, you said, what are we doing in states? Yeah, so we launched our state network this past year, really with the kind of mindset that clarity, obviously we want clarity to pass at the federal level, but there's so much policy movement in the states, and a lot of times it's being done by one or two actors in kind of silos across all these different states. So we really serve as a connective thread. I think that's the big value of our state network. You could hire any lobbying shop to go in there and introduce an amendment or advocate against a bill you don't like. But I think our role is really that connective thread of we see a leader in Wyoming, like Anthony Apollo, for example, who we're very close to from the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. He's brilliant, and the work he's doing in Wyoming deserves to be amplified. Wyoming is such a trailblazing leading state. Why don't we, bring him out to other states? Why don't we kind of bring industry to these state capitals as a collective voice, not just as one business saying, hey, we don't like this bill, but as an industry saying, hey, we think that you need to do X, Y, and Z to really harness growth. So that's a big part of what our state network does. My boss, Anastasia Delaccio, she's sitting on a task force right now in Delaware. Obviously, Delaware is sort of a home of incorporation, but we're trying to figure out how we can right-size the rules there. In Louisiana as well, we're standing up a task force. There's a few other states. So it's really just being that industry voice, that industry presence, the connective thread of all these different legislators and leaders.
Well, we're looking forward to reaching back out then. Would love to talk more about it.
Yeah. You had a question? What was it? Sorry. Yeah, so every year around March, April time, the Digital Chamber hosts the DC Blockchain Summit. So it's one of the largest policy gatherings in DC related to crypto, digital assets. Last year, we were super grateful, lucky to have over 100 members of Congress and their staffs attend, speak at the event. Also, just a great opportunity to meet other folks interested in policy, interested in building in this space. JP, I don't know, you've attended more of them than I have, so.
Yeah, no, it's a great time. For anyone who has done the conference and event circuit, the side events are also always fun. We have a number of our members, a number of companies, who are in town from abroad. They'll be hosting events at restaurants in town, happy hours, lunch and learns, breakfasts. Of course, we host our own. We would love to invite all of you to come on through. If you want more information, we're happy to pass that along as well. Don't let us leave without giving us your contact info, and we'll get it over to you. But it's super important for not just for the conversation in DC, but for our industry. So much of this stuff is international, is happening with fully remote teams that don't even sit in the same office 5 days a week. So having these segmented pieces, these events where everyone can congregate, we can really get it all out on the floor. Catch everybody up on what's going on. An idea we have for next year, we'll see if the big boss, if the CEO lets me ride with it, is to get prediction markets sponsoring certain rooms and have real-time does the audience's opinion change, and maybe give somebody a little play money as they go in, or maybe get people to give a little money, and ultimately a portion of the proceeds goes toward a charity or a legal defense fund. So we want to make sure that we're constantly improving these events. If anybody has been and has ideas for how to make them better, we are also totally open to that.
And we are out of time. Thank you guys all. You've been an awesome audience. Please feel free to connect with JP and myself after if you want to hear more about our work.
Thank you both so much. I will second the event you guys put on is wonderful and thank you. Keeps you very entertained for what, 2 days, 3 days? 2.